Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our next session where we are delighted to have with us Amer Iqbal. He's the APAC Head of Digital Transformation at Facebook. Today, Amer is going to talk to us about how you can master the art of change from within and how you can unlock new capabilities from your internal teams. So without further ado, over to you, Amer.
Thanks, Sean, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great conference so far. So the title of my presentation here today, I've called it Mastering the Art of Change. But actually, what I like to call it is Karate and Coffee. This is going to be a slightly different presentation, perhaps, than some of the other sessions that you'll see today, because I'm not going to give a presentation. I'm going to tell you a story today. And it's a story in 3 chapters. Chapter number 1, I'm going to talk about a time that I was in Bali trying to buy a cup of coffee. It took a really long time, but believe it or not, there was a good lesson to take away from that. Chapter 2, I'm going to talk about Japanese martial arts, an ancient martial arts framework that we can learn from in terms of business today. And chapter 3, I want to take a bit of time to talk about this very specific period in time where we are today, coming out of COVID, future of work. There's so much conversation about these sorts of things, and what we can learn from my karate and coffee stories and potentially apply to this particular problem. Okay, so let's start with the Balinese coffee story. And I'm going to take you way back now to a time, if you recall, when we were all able to jump on a plane and travel. So this was back in 2019. It was one of the last trips that I was able to take before the whole COVID lockdowns kicked in. And it was just a short weekend trip, 3 days with 2 of my best friends. We traveled to Bali, and this is the villa that we were staying at. We spent a great deal of time just lounging around in that pool there, drink in hand, basically talking about nothing too much important. But here's the thing, as well as being 2 of my best friends, there are also 2 ex-colleagues. We were all consultants together once upon a time. So mixed in with just talking about what's going on, there was also a lot of shop talk. So a lot of, hey, here's a really cool podcast that I was listening to the other day, or hey, there's this article that I read that you should check out, or here's the book that I'm reading at the moment. So a really good exchange of ideas between 3 friends was going on. Now, here's the other thing. Besides the beautiful pool and location, one of the other reasons that we chose this specific villa was because of its proximity to a coffee shop. And so, full disclosure, 2 of the 3 of us are what I would probably call coffee snobs. We're really, really into our coffee. And so we'd scanned all of the reviews and had a look at where is the best coffee in the area. And we'd landed on this particular coffee shop. And so, yes, I know in Seminyak there are lots and lots of great coffee shops, but this one in particular stood out because the reviews all talked about how consistently good the coffee is. And I think for any other fellow coffee snobs out there, one of the worst things that happens is you find this great cafe, you have a great cup of coffee, but then you go back tomorrow and maybe there's a different barista on, the coffee is not so good, it's burnt or whatever the case may be. So this one was highly rated for having consistently good coffee. So the villa that we'd chosen was literally this lane that you see here out the front. Our villa was just 100 meters up the road. So it was a very short walk. So on the first morning there, I kind of put up my hand and volunteered and I said, guys, I'll go down, I'll get us some coffees and I'll bring them back to the villa. So I took the short walk, and as I stepped into the cafe, this was the sight that I saw. So very hipstery, the smell, really, really good smell of coffee coming up. But this young gentleman was making the coffee. So I step up to the counter, order a very basic order, just 3 simple black coffees, and pay for my coffee, take a step back. And then I just started to watch the performance. So I'll give you a bit of a breakdown of how this guy was making a cup of coffee. So he had a pair of tweezers and he counted out the coffee beans individually. He then weighed the coffee beans on this precision scale. So there are lots and lots of these precision scales scattered all around the bar area. He weighed the beans, then he grinds the beans, and then the beans go back on the precision scale again, as if in the process of grinding, perhaps some of this matter had evaporated into the ether or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but every single step of the coffee making process was really, really extreme. So even measuring out, you can probably see here, he's got beakers and almost like a chemistry set. So measuring out water, measuring out milk, it's all done to the milliliter. I kid you not, when it gets time to brewing the coffee, he pulled out a stopwatch. It's like watching an Olympic official judging the 100-meter sprint. He was timing the amount of time that the coffee is brewing for. And then once all the ingredients are combined back into the cup, you guessed it, back on the scale again. So I'm just kind of standing here a little bit bewildered, just watching this process of making a cup of coffee. And as I looked around, there's about a dozen people waiting there who have clearly been waiting for some time. So that this coffee making process, as well as being involved, was also very time consuming. So as I'm standing there observing, the manager, you can sort of see there in the background, there's a fridge. So the manager of the store had walked in, was starting to restock the fridge, and he caught my gaze and decided to come over and have a chat with me. And he kind of explained, okay, so I can see you having a look at this young barista and wondering what's going on. So let me explain. Here's the deal. He told me in Bali, it's very, very difficult to hold on to staff, especially when you're running a coffee shop. You basically have this revolving door of young, inexperienced staff coming through. They may stay for a few weeks, they may stay for a few months, but it's very hard to hold on to staff consistently. And so as a result, as you might imagine, it's hard to keep up quality control and maintain that consistent level of good coffee that I was talking about. So the manager's solution to this was he had hired one of his old friends part-time, who was a retired master barista, just a master at making coffee. And what this barista had done was, if you look here in the background on the microwave, you can see these little sticky notes there. The barista had basically taken his own coffee making process to make the best cup of coffee in town and broken it down into a step-by-step, like a very highly detailed step-by-step process that basically anyone, even somebody who's never made a cup of coffee before, could step behind the counter, just follow these steps very directly and make a surprisingly high level of coffee. And so I thought, wow, that's actually kind of a cool solution to how do you maintain consistency when you don't have any consistency in your workforce, and especially you're trying to create these new capabilities in people. So finally, after quite a wait, I got my 3 cups of coffee and took the short walk back to the villa to tell my friends about this experience that I'd just had. And that brings us to chapter 2 of our story. So a Japanese martial arts framework. So as I walked into the villa, I gave my friends their coffees. They were clearly wondering why I'd been gone for so long. One of my friends piped up and said, hey, listen, that really reminds me of this ancient Japanese martial arts framework called Shuhari. And so I looked at him a bit quizzically, and he said, okay, so Shuhari, here's how it works. Basically, it is derived from ancient Japanese martial arts, and it describes the 3 stages that anybody goes on the path to mastery. So Shu, or the beginner stage, is where we all start as students. The goal there is to find a master and follow their process without any kind of deviation. So this is clearly what our young barista was doing. He had the master barista, had given him the checklist. He didn't question the theory. He didn't wonder, why do I have to put this much milk, or why is the stopwatch, this many seconds? Just follow what the master tells you to do and don't ask any questions. And for any fans of the movie The Karate Kid, you'll be well familiar with this, right? Wax on, wax off, sand the floor, paint the fence. Daniel-san didn't really need to question what was going on, because his teacher, his sensei, Mr. Miyagi, was teaching him the raw skills that he would require in order to perform karate. So don't question the theory, just follow the master and do. Then eventually, after a while of practice, we get to an intermediate, or the Ha stage. So this is where you're still not inventing principles yourself, but what you're able to do is say, okay, well, I've got my master's practice, but also here are some other masters, and I can borrow, sort of pick and choose the Lego blocks, if you will, and configure my own sort of process and start to adapt and be a bit more flexible with those sorts of things. And then eventually, after, depending on what you're doing, it may be years, maybe months of practice, we achieve the Re, or the mastery stage. And that's where you can abandon any need for playbooks or rigid processes, because now we've got the ingrained principles through our own practice. We've done it enough times now. We've spent enough hours doing the same thing over and over again, whereby our own practice has taught us the ingrained principles required in order to achieve mastery. So I thought, wow, that's a great framework that actually explains a piece of work that we'd done in the business world a few years prior. So I think that the final note on Shuhari is much like Kaizen or some of these other Japanese frameworks, it's starting to take hold in the business world. And one of the key places for any of you agile practitioners out there, you will have heard of Shuhari because it's quite a common principle that's used in agile adoption. So this was a case study of a telco that I was working with a number of years ago as a consultant. And basically the problem statement that we'd been brought in to look at was the HR department of this telco they'd spent, I think, 6 or more months trying to roll out an agile organization. They were trying to roll out agile across the org. And they'd chosen sort of a few cohorts to run this through rather than trying to roll it out to the entire company at once. But about 6 months in, the exec team was looking at it and saying, look, this agile experiment has completely failed. We're actually being less productive than we were before. I don't know why we're even trying to change things. Can we just go back to the way things were before, because that will make things more efficient? We'll just go back to the way things are. So to use the phrase, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, they just wanted to go back to the way things were and ignore the fact that they'd ever tried this agile thing. So we came in and kind of as a last ditch effort, had a look at how they were implementing agile and tried to analyze, look, is there anything that we can kind of tweak here to make it a more productive thing as opposed to taking them backwards? And so to use a very simple example, obviously it was a multifaceted thing, but the daily stand-up was just a very, very simple example of something that they'd gotten very, very wrong in the implementation. So for those of you, of course, who have done any sort of agile practice, you know, a daily stand-up is, as the name suggests, it happens daily, happens generally at the same time, say 9 a.m. every day. The project team, which is 9 or 10 people who are working on a specific piece of work, will stand up. For about 10 minutes, you'll go around in a circle. Everyone will spend maybe a minute each talking about the work that they're doing. And the idea is just sort of a quick daily check-in, no structure, no slides, none of that sort of stuff. It's just about getting work done. Now, we came into this telco and observed what was going on with their daily stand-up. So I've written here 45 minutes. That's being generous. Some days it was taking over an hour. It was less of a daily stand-up. It seemed much more like a kind of status update. And so we looked into the reasons behind why was something as simple as a daily stand-up failing. And one of the primary reasons was there were a few very senior execs from the C-suite who insisted on participating in these sessions because they wanted to see what all this fuss was about with the agile thing that was going on. And so as a result, the team, rather than using the daily stand-up as a productive conversation, it very quickly became a status update. And as we know with status updates to very senior execs, it's always good news. They weren't really talking about the things that needed to be improved or things that were going wrong. And so they were using slides. They were spending hours a day to prepare slides to present in the daily stand-up tomorrow morning to these senior execs. So they're wasting time on making slides rather than just getting the work done. The last thing, and possibly the most damaging, was obviously some of these senior execs have a very busy schedule. So they say, well, it can't be at 9 a.m. every day. On this day, it might be at 3 p.m. On another day, we might skip it altogether. So the team had to work around their schedule now, their meeting schedule. And it had just become another very unproductive meeting. So we said, okay, guys, look, time out. Can we just go way back to the beginning here and start to walk before we can run? And so what we said was, using the daily stand-up as an example, let's implement some very fixed rules now. Here's the daily stand-up. It's going to happen every day at 9 a.m. Doesn't matter if you got caught in traffic or what happens, it's happening every day at 9 a.m. It's only the project team. So only the 9 or 10 people who are involved in that specific piece of work can participate. Senior execs can be in the room, but you'll need to be a fly on the wall. It's not a presentation for them. And the format that we set was the very straightforward 3 questions. It's what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And what are my blockers? That's all you get to talk about. And you have 1 minute each. So the whole meeting can't last more than 10 minutes and we will physically stand up. Let's go. So for the first 2 weeks, if I'm being honest, it felt a bit awkward. People were kind of going through the motions, not really sure what's going on. They're looking over at a very senior boss over there who's kind of a bit confused by the whole process. But we acted as the gatekeepers and protected these teams. And what we saw was after about a month, they were very comfortable with the process. And they were actually using it as a productive conversation about getting more work done. After about 2 months, what we saw was really great gains. So for the first time ever, they were able to accurately forecast the work that they were doing. And this is even pre-Agile days. What we discovered is it's not that their productivity had been going backwards. They were just overestimating the amount of work that they could do. And so they're always falling short of targets. So using a basic point system, we implemented a much more stringent way of estimating the amount of work. They were able to calculate their velocity and plan work around that. Hey, presto, all of a sudden productivity is going through the roof. And then they started to experiment with the format of those 3 questions. They added a 4th question, etc. I would say probably at around the 5 or maybe 6 month mark is when they achieved mastery. We saw different teams using different formats for the daily stand-up, but across the board, it had become this kind of thing that was actually focused on productivity and output, as opposed to just trying to paint a rosy picture of a project that may not be going so well. And again, I would stress that the ability to forecast work for the first time ever in that company really turned things around from a project management point of view, just absolutely let them focus much more on features and services that were much more critical and high priority, which just increased their ability to launch products to market much faster. And again, this was a number of years ago. This is a program that's still being rolled out amongst cohorts today in that organization. So it's been quite a large success across the board. But it all started with, let's just go back to the basics. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about the changes that we're facing today. And as I said, I think we're at a very important juncture in time right here today, whereby we're kind of coming out of COVID. A lot of offices are reopening. And my fear is this, much like the Agile story, hey, we tried something, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and just go back to the way things were. I feel that's what we'll see in a lot of workplaces, just because it's easy to go back to the way things were. But having said that, I mean, obviously it was a global pandemic. It's not an ideal situation, but also there have been some really good things that have come out of this past 18 months. We've learned a lot about how work gets done, where our inefficiencies are, and potentially some lessons for what the new normal, next normal, whatever you want to call it, might look like. So I'll talk a little bit about 5 trends or changes that I think are quite generic and all companies are facing today. But more importantly, I want to land on a framework at the end, which talks about how we can use that Shuhari framework to help us bring the best of both worlds into the next stage of work. So managing change with Shuhari, here are 5 big trends I think we're all facing. The trends aren't that important, really. I'm more interested in the changes or the shifts that need to be created. So distributed workforce, work from home, work from office, work from cafe, WFC, that's something I put in my calendar often when I feel like working from a cafe. What do these new models look like? And certainly the shift needs to be, rather than just going back to the office and having micromanagers and presenteeism and all that kind of stuff we used to have in the olden days. How can we shift from remote workforce to distributed productivity that can happen anywhere? Second one is exponential change. So I always talk about technology. I use the analogy of the Ferrari of tech stacks. Everybody goes out and buys the best tech stack there is, but if you're just using the same technology as everyone else, it's not really a differentiator. So what we see is, rather than investing in people, process, and data, companies are over-investing in technology. So shifting towards procuring capabilities rather than procuring technologies. Third one is leadership change. I talked about the role of managers shifting from being towards being a remote coach and creating that psychological safety. So from authority to autonomy. Fourth, all companies are tech companies. I've heard many times we are a tech company with X utilities. That's great, but how do you actually bring that to life and set yourself up to compete with the digital disruptors in your industry? And the fifth one, of course, threat of new entrants. We saw this in a number of different industries. I think that actually the food service industry was a really interesting one during the pandemic with the rise of cloud kitchens and food delivery services. There are always new entrants coming there. So from a HR perspective, a really important decision to think about which capabilities will we build and where should we partner and build ecosystems. Okay, so very last thing before we jump to a Q&A. I wanted to run a bit of an exercise and leave this behind. If you take one thing away from this presentation, I hope it can be this change mastery matrix. How can we use Shu Ha Ri or beginner intermediate mastery to plan for these sorts of changes? And as I say, the 5 things down the left column there, you can replace those with things that are relevant to you. But the more important thing is, how do you start with the basics and plot a path to mastery? So for example, distributed workforce, in my personal experience, what we saw was this. In the early days, everything just became a meeting, everything became a Zoom call. We lost those casual interactions, the water cooler conversations, all that sort of stuff. I definitely suffered from some level of Zoom burnout. So that was kind of the Shu stage. We just needed to get work done. So let's shift everything over to Zoom or whatever VC platform you're using. Intermediate was recognizing the impact on people's time. So for example, I've seen a number of company tools. Our company did this. In our calendar, when I try to book a meeting with someone, it will open both of our calendars and it will suggest a time slot and say, look, the impact on both of your focus time will be 30 minutes. But if you put the meeting here, it will be 3 hours because it's backing onto a series of other meetings or whatever the case may be. So systems that can intelligently recognize where it's not just booking in slots in a calendar, there is actually a human factor to all of this. And then third, I'd say, is mastery. For me personally, here's a great example. I've always said, I wish I could clone myself and be in 2 places at once. Well, I'm doing that right now. As I'm talking to you live on this presentation, I'm also giving a presentation to another company right now. How am I able to do that? Well, I just pre-recorded that session on a video and they're playing that over there. So now as a public speaker, I can literally be in 2 places at once and double my productivity. So in a way, this whole work from home thing can be used as a strength. There is sort of a mastery level to it there. So I won't spend more time on these examples, but again, I just want to leave this framework behind for all of you. There will be a handout that you'll receive later. I highly encourage everybody to have a think about what are the big changes that are facing you personally or your company, and how can you plot that Shu Ha Ri path to mastery there. Okay, so just before we wrap up for the Q&A, I'll just give you a few takeaways. First thing to remember, change is the only constant. We can't deny it, otherwise we've already failed. Quick fixes don't work, especially in a digital economy. As Satya Nadella said, there's been 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. Things change very rapidly that aren't in our control. Looking forward to look backwards, there are some ancient frameworks like Shu Ha Ri that can teach us wisdom for the future. And please have some freedom within that framework. Feel free to replace those 5 trends, things that are relevant to you, but I would highly encourage you to use that change matrix. And always remember, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Getting started is the most important part. So don't feel shy to start with the Shu stage. Just find a master and begin with the basics. And a bonus 6th tip, of course, if we're ever able to go back to Bali, I highly recommend the coffee here. It was actually very good.